So 2020 looked like it should be a great sailing year. After a couple of years of sailing around the Forth and visiting various ports, Kenneth Lang and James Gibbons, that's myself, decided to take the plunge and buy a bigger boat over on the west coast. After some time and consideration, we settled on a Westerly Storm 33, and after finding our boat Thunder, we completed her purchase in March 2020, 2 weeks before lockdown. For the next 4.5 months, the closest that I got to seeing a boat was in pictures from previous years, and occasionally trialling my own designs in my sink at home. Eventually, however, Big Nicola and Big Boris eventually decided we could mix with other households, and suddenly the sailing season was on, with the first voyage in our new boat and the first voyage of the season. We set sail from the Great Harbour in Greenock, James Watt Dock, where we kept the boat, and headed, as the Glaswegians would say, down the water to the top of the Kyles of Bute. We took a quick loop through the narrows at the very top. Here the tides can move quite quickly, and we were searching for a place to anchor. There are a number of spots, mainly behind the islands. Eventually we settled on a spot behind Island Moor. Had a spot to eat, blew up the tender, and went to explore what is actually known as the Bottock of Bute. To Cala Harbour and Loch Ridden, as well as Island Booya, Bute, Island Moor. It's really a beautiful spot. We anchored in about 4 metres and had good holding. The Kyles so far has always been very flat, even when the wind picks up, so it makes a really comfortable spot for an evening. Next, it was a spinnaker run back up the Clyde to pick up a new crew member, Charlotte, for our longer cruise. It was back up to the Kyles and this time to Loch Ridden. We took advantage of the fact that many of the moorings were vacant due to COVID. The top of Loch Ridden is largely taken up with moorings and there's little space to anchor, but it's one of the most beautiful places that we stayed. It's really quiet. There's loads of wildlife, otters, seals, birds. We saw an osprey. And there's also some excellent walks ashore, mainly on the Cowell Way, down towards Tina Brook, which passes through Cala Harbour and also gives some excellent views over the Kyles of Bute. The weather was fantastic these 2 days. 25 degrees, sunny. We could have been in Croatia. The forecast, however, did contain some stronger winds coming from the northwest, so we decided to head up towards Tarbet, which is a well-sheltered harbour on the entire peninsula. On the way, we stopped and anchored off Ruvavan Bay. This is just opposite the Kames Hotel on the western Kyle. It was so warm that I have to say I did have a swim. After a quick trip ashore, it was back to sailing, and by this point it was starting to get a bit breezier. As we turned up to Loch Fyne, things started to get a little sporty. Despite fairly small waves in the scheme of things, we still had force 6 gusting 7 with 30 odd knots over the deck at times, so it was quite a lively beat with 2 reefs and a partially reefed Genoa. Having raced a Contessa 32 and won, we eventually made it into Tarbert Marina. The marina has good facilities and is reasonably priced for a night or two. There are also some really nice walks locally around Tarbert, and you can cross right over to Westloch Tarbert and see the other side. In days gone by, apparently they used to pull Viking boats across here, long before the Caledonian Canal. The next day we had the wind in our favour, again from the northwest, blowing force 5-6. This time we were running down to Kilchatton Bay on the southeast corner of Butte, where the plan was to anchor. We made pretty good progress on the 20-mile journey. The only spicy bit was as we rounded the bottom of Butte around the overfalls. We were in a wind over tide situation, which made recovering the spinnaker pole a little more interesting than perhaps it could have been. Eventually, however, we did make it into Kilchatton Bay safely, only to find that the force 6 had strengthened further and there was very little shelter for anchoring. We decided discretion was the best part of valour and bailed over to Millport, which was more sheltered from the northwest on Cumbrae. We squeaked into Cumbrae. It was below the lowest astronomical tide, so the chart was showing a worryingly low water level. We also weren't quite sure exactly where our new boat's echo sounder was focused. Was it from the keel or was it from the hull? So we had a brief anxious moment, but made it in safely and picked up a visitor mooring. We took an excursion ashore after dinner. To be honest, it was a little disappointing. Millport is slightly down at heel, perhaps partially due to the COVID-19 issues. However, it is a beautiful spot, provided the wind is not coming from the southwest. You can see here that we've got Arran right behind us, always covered in cloud. It was another beautiful morning on the Costa del Clyde, and the mountains of Arran looked spectacular. This time we were sailing around to St Ninian's Bay, on the other side of Butte. Once anchored, we started a spot of fishing, and eventually got ourselves a few mackerel. That evening we barbecued, pretty unusual on the west coast of Scotland, and there was a beautiful sunset over the mountains on Arran, our destination for the next day. The anchorage was a little exposed. We were anchored at 7-8 metres, and the holding was good, but there was definitely a slight rolling that night. Next day it was a short hop to Loch Ranza. This is the only place in Arran that actually put in visitor moorings this year, so it's often busy. The weather again was fantastic, with great views of Goat Fell and the surrounding mountains. This was definitely one of our favourite spots that we visited. We took a short trip ashore, primarily to go to the distillery and stock up the boat's bar. The waters of Loch Fyne are some of the clearest in the UK, as there are no major rivers flowing into it. So after a wee dram, I had another swim. All too soon it was time to head the 32 nautical miles back to civilization, if that's what you can call Greenock. With the wind from the northwest, force 4, gusting 5, we dodged a few military boats, including a submarine, USS Seawolf, that appeared quite alarmingly fast just behind us, and reached, then fetched, right up to Clock Point. It had been a brilliant first trip, and we were lucky enough to enjoy a few more like it throughout the rest of the year.